So a couple of months back, Ellie from Letter and Journal had me make a video documenting my first ever journal, and it was called One Man's Bullet Journal. In it, I showed off my first ever journal, a really sloppy bullet journal. I talked about some of the main principles that I was going after and some of the tactics that I used to apply those principles through my bullet journaling. Now look, I'm surprised, really surprised, that tens of thousands of people have watched this video, and many of them said that it was kind of helpful, and I'm really thrilled about that. So here we are, almost 2 months into a brand new year, and in the first 2 months of 2017, I've been reflecting on how I can, be a better adult. I came away from this time of reflection with 5 core commitments and with a handful of bullet journal practices that will put these principles into practice every day. In part 1 of this video, I'll tell you about these 5 core commitments and explain them to you. Maybe I'll inspire you to create your own, or you can rip mine off if you want. And then in part 2, I'll show you how I use my bullet journal to go after these 5 core commitments and put them into practice. So here we go, part 1, my 5 core commitments. So recently, my boss had our leadership team at work decide what our personal core values are. I aimed for things that would be as concrete as possible rather than abstract. I wanted my core commitments to be actionable. What I ended up with was a list of 5 things that all happened to start with the letter I. So here we go. As I reflected on these 5 I's, I realized that they actually span a continuum from, on the one side, the most active and engaged and immersed, all the way to the other side, which is the most reflective, not detached, but intentionally reflective. So, starting on the most engaged end of things, I've got intimacy. This is a commitment to relational presence. And then also on the engaged end of the spectrum, I've got immersion. This means immersion in my work, my vocation, if you like, vocational vigor. And then right smack in the middle is intentionality. Less, but better, with an emphasis here on less. Then a tad toward the more reflective end of things is improvement. Less, but better, with an emphasis this time on better. And finally, on the most reflective end, I've got intellection. My tagline here is a mind awake. So, being fully present in my relationships, being fully engaged in my work, intentionally planning my days, reflecting on how I can improve, and a commitment to thought and learning. So what I want to do is unpack these 5 core commitments, with most of the emphasis being on immersion, intimacy, and intellection, because intentionality and improvement will feature mostly in part 2 as the way that I go after these other commitments through bullet journaling practices. So first, intimacy. Stephen Covey's got this book, First Things First, and it's great. Intimacy is about first people first. People are more important than things, right? My commitment is to have deeply meaningful relationships, and that requires that I spend quality time with the most important people in my life, and that I give them unrestricted, undistracted, full engagement. For me, these people are, of course, my wife, but they're also my 3 boys, but then also a finite amount of people that I have sensed that I'm called to. People whose lives are speaking into mine and improving mine, and people who, of course, I can hopefully be a blessing to myself. Practically, I realize this means I need to schedule quality time with my wife, and this means, of course, getting her a cup of coffee as soon as possible each morning. Yeah. I've also felt like I've spent a lot of time with my family, but I don't know that I've spent a lot of quality time with each of my sons. And so I want that to change. And what this means is that I'm scheduling quality time with each of them. And I'm pursuing their hearts. I'm looking towards their interests, and I'm seeing if I can encourage them in any specific ways. And it takes planning and intentionality to do that. I'm also learning how to say no, not just, of course, to toxic people, but also to people that I'd really love to spend time with, but to whom I don't really sense that I am called at this moment. That could change in the future, but instead of saying yes to people based on the whim of how I'm feeling, and then taking my time away from other people, this enables me to say yes by default to the people that I am called to. Now, this all might sound weird or antisocial. I don't really think it is. It's just a recognition that I'm finite, right? I'm not God's gift to the world, and so I can only be fully present to one person at a time. So I'm deciding ahead of time, who am I going to spend my finite, fully present, engaged time with? And then there's immersion. Immersion is the vocational version of being relationally present. For much of my adult life, I've gotten to the end of a workday or the end of a week and felt this vague sense of, did I do anything? Like, I did things, but did I do important things? Did I get anything done? I wasn't focused, I was welcoming all kinds of distractions, and whether I worked hard or slacked off, there was always this sense at the end of the day of waste. What did I do? If I've got 30 years left of my career, I want to give myself to it in a way that I can go home every night and every weekend and have this sense that I did my job and did it well. Practically, during a workday, this means that quality planning time is required so that I teach well. And I have to spend focused time on specific projects. Specific practices for me include no social media during the workday. I'm even trying to avoid email during the time that I've allotted to specific tasks. I'm focused on a specific task. Email can be its own specific task at its own time, but not while I'm focused on the one thing that's important in that moment. And then I want to have a sense of closure, both at the end of each project, at the end of each task, and also at the end of each day and week. And so this requires a sort of transition or a shutdown period. I want to intentionally move from one thing to the next. And if I need a 5-minute break for coffee, then fine, I can do that too. I want to commit to working the plan that I've put into place for a particular day. I'll be flexible and change if I need to, but for the most part, I want to plan the work and then I want to actually work the plan. Immersion means that I'm in the zone. It means I'm focused. There's only this one thing in front of me. But it's also the sense that I'm freely and gladly giving myself to the work in front of me. Why? Because the work itself is worthy. I've deemed it worthy by putting it in my schedule. Immersion, therefore, honors the worthiness of the work that I've got in front of me in the same way that intimacy honors the worthiness of the person that I've got there in my presence. Now, briefly, intentionality. Less, but better. So Greg McKeown has this book, Essentialism. And as he says there, if we don't choose, someone or something else will choose for us. I was haunted by John Maxwell's quote as well. You cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. You can already tell from intimacy and immersion that intentionality is really vital for me. I'm committed to choosing to fill my days and my life with actions and practices and people that matter most, and then just letting everything else go. Less, but better. Less is not in and of itself more, but I think it is the essential first step for me anyway. And in part 2, I'll show you how I practice less is more intentionality with my bullet journal. So moving from the engaged end of the spectrum toward the reflective end, the next thing up is improvement. Less, but better. I don't want to just do fewer things. I want to do the few things that I am doing well. I want to do them better than I did before. My dissertation writing can be better if I reflect on ways to improve my process. My fitness will improve if my running improves, and my running improves as I do a little bit more, a little bit quicker on each run. Like I said, so many days or weeks I'd go to bed feeling like I didn't really do anything important. But other days, I've also had the feeling like I was awesome. The commitment to improvement for me is a commitment to reviewing my life and my commitments, and then to actually discerning what I'm doing well and what can be improved. Then my emotional response to my day or my week can be built on something of an objective evaluation rather than just how I kind of felt. More on how I use the journal to do this, again, in part 2. Last, on the far end of the reflective spectrum, is intellection. Now you're probably thinking, intellection? This sounds really pretentious. Of course you would say that. Basically though, I'm just trying to be thoughtful. I want to grow in my knowledge. I want to have wisdom across a variety of areas of my life, not just my vocation. And I think that knowledge is worth pursuing in and of itself. Sometimes I think that the tyranny of the practical gets in the way here. It gets in the way of learning and growing, right? In the same way that you feel a vague sense of waste when you're not sure if you did everything right that day, you can also feel a sense of guilt when you are just reading a book because you like it, because you're learning something, and not because it can immediately be put into your life in some practical way. I think that's all wrong. You shouldn't feel guilty. Knowledge and the pursuit of it is a worthy end in and of itself. But of course, it's also necessary to have solitary time to think and to read about your vocation. Bill Gates, of course, is famous for having his Think Weeks right in the middle of the most busy times of running Microsoft. And practically speaking, this means that I want to avoid just defaulting to social media and email whenever I'm standing around or sitting around or commuting from one place to the next. Instead, I want to fill the cracks of my day with some learning. For me right now, this means going through a language learning app. I'm trying to bone up on my French so that I can read for my dissertation, but also so that I can go to France for the first time this summer and not just be that dumb American. I also need to block off time for solitude, so that it's scheduled and committed to, just like any other practice in my life. And then I don't have to feel one bit of guilt about reading and thinking. It's in my schedule, I'm just following my schedule. So there you go, my 5 core commitments. I'm finally starting to reconcile myself to the fact that I'm an adult, and that adulting is hard, but it's worth it. It's not complicated, it's not easy, it's simple and it's hard. And these 5 core commitments remind me of the simplicity of what I'm trying to do and enable me to simply just dig in and do the hard work of being the grown-up that I'm supposed to be, just a little bit better. In part 2, I'll show you how I use my bullet journal to go after these 5 core commitments in practical ways. I hope you'll tune in then. Thanks a lot for watching.